The first rule of Incite Club is you don't talk about Incite Club. You do Incite Club. The second rule of Incite Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Incite Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Incite Club.
And welcome to Incite Club. So today we're going to start with the homework as well, always. Here's me and Megan to talk with you and maybe a special guest today.
Yes, possibly. So I accidentally did the homework, but in a sideways way. And the homework, as a reminder for everyone, was to when you find yourself in that feeling of being triggered, being activated by something, to try a self-soothing technique. And we talked about humming. We talked about tapping on some of the EFT points. Hey, Lise, I'm just double checking you can still hear me because I know my connection was bad.
I can. So let me
Okay.
just take the white elephant off the room. We started a little bit later today because we had some connection issues, and we
Yeah.
hope you're getting us. Actually, I was just checking the YouTube by my side here to see if is everything working, and I see that your video sometimes stops,
Okay.
but I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And your video is still frozen for me. So that's why I was checking in. Like, am I still here? And gosh, this is interesting how disorienting. I mean, let's just take a moment and recognize how disorienting reality becomes when we're not sure other people are in it with us.
Yeah, and even how technology can be like bringing our topic today can be a big trigger. Like even the fact that like um we know that time is not actually like linear and like it has that relativity and so on, but when your video is lagging and you're listening one thing and you're seeing something else, or even like not seeing movement at all,
Yeah.
it can be disorienting in that sense as well. Like, what am
Yeah.
I?
It's a great reminder for me of how we create our reality with other people, and we need other people to reinforce our reality. Otherwise, it's like, "Oh, whoa, am I am I on a different planet?" So it's that's maybe a great theme to kind of keep in mind, why we want to agree with people, why it can be so troubling when people have different opinions from us, because we're like, well, no, I need this reinforcement of my reality and I need this co-creation of my reality. Otherwise, I'm not
Yeah,
sure what the world is.
we need that feedback response. It's like the echo, right? If we
Oh,
hear the echo, we know that okay, there's uh, I'm being heard. There's life in there.
yes. Oh,
And yeah, go ahead. You have an insight.
well, yeah, because then it makes me think of a spectrum. And when we're literally just hearing our own words echoed and our own thoughts echoed back, it doesn't help us grow. But if we're in a place, like if we're at the other end of the spectrum and we're only hearing things that are different from us. I was just reading like a psychology book, and it was talking about these studies where there was a group of people, and they were shown, things that were clearly in red ink, right? But there's plants in the group, like people who are set up to say, no, it's orange. And they found that if there were like 3 people in the group who are all saying it was orange, then the person being tested would eventually capitulate and go, I guess it's orange, even though clearly it was red.
Yeah.
And the same thing with like blue and green. If there's only one person speaking up and saying it's red, it's orange, then everybody else would, say it's whatever was the color it truly was. But so if it's all echo, if it's all just other people saying exactly the same thing, I think I don't get to grow. But if it's all argument, I start to lose my sense of self and go, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm crazy. So I just that's an interesting how much difference helps us is a question that's coming to me.
Yeah. And how interesting it is that as we're talking about this, your video is not lagging anymore. Like,
Oh.
it got into a state of coherence.
Oh, I love it. That's so good. Okay, so I'll jump back to the homework. I was driving and I saw a bumper sticker that probably to any other human being was like totally innocuous. And I just like I found myself exploding in rage. I was sitting in my car yelling, just and I was like, "Oh, okay. Obviously, I'm not doing, something that's self-soothing, like the tapping points, but I am at the same time doing something that my nervous system was calling for." So I was like, "Isn't that interesting? By exploding in rage, um, my body is finding a way to get what it needs."
Mm,
Is that making sense?
yes. Ah, I love that.
So then I was like, "Okay, well, what do I really need?" It's like, obviously, I need to be seen, I need to be heard, and, I ended up having a really amazing conversation with my mom recently, and I was telling her about this and having the conversation with her, and she mentioned something about, um, ancestral trauma. And I was like, "Oh, I don't think all the anger I'm feeling about this is from my lifetime. I don't think all the anger I'm having around this is from my history
Mm.
as 43-year-old Megan Barnhart. There's something deeper because the level of anger I was having, I was like, "Where does this come from?"
Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying that maybe you needed to release that energy, because anger is just, if we go to the bottom of it, it's just energy as well, right? And I find it so funny because as we were talking about this, and I thought, that I do these releases on a constant, but I haven't thought of the homework during this weeks, 2 weeks. But I done exactly the release of anger, because one of my favorite release practices, which is not necessarily a self-soothing practice, but you could say that it is the shaking. So that uh, which is meant to release like any anger, any excess energy, any stored emotions that I feel like, for me, especially with Moon in Aries, like I get a lot of that vibration of energy stored.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes the thing that helps the most is like really yelling, and
Yeah.
like not at someone, but just like as a practice, like just yell.
Yeah. Gosh, you know what my mind just flashed to? At the very beginning of my career, I was a classroom aide in a special education school, and the school was really well resourced, and they had physical therapists, occupational therapists, voice and speech pathologists, social workers. They had all this support staff, and there was one physical therapist who would like come into our classroom and take kids for their time, and one thing she would have them do was stand and push against a wall. And I was just hearing about this recently too in the context of like kids having big energy, where if you push, if you like use all your force, if you use all your might on something, it's a really powerful nervous system regulator
Yeah.
because you're focusing this surge of energy and like using your strength, and at the same time you're not hurting yourself and you're not destroying anything, which can have its own its own cycle of guilt and challenges, right? But like these kids would be in the classroom and they'd be kind of like, oh, all this energy and disruptive, and then the physical therapist would take them um into their, sorry, not a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, she would take them and they would push on the wall and then come back and be
That's so
totally
interesting.
different.
That's the same process of like tensing your whole body, and then when you can't hold anymore, you release, and it feels so relaxing because there's a contrast that we so need to be able to experience everything. And I was talking about this because it goes back to the generational trauma that you mentioned. We can't make sense of things that we haven't lived, but they can still be stored in our genes, in our body, in our cells,
Yeah.
and even things that we lived but we haven't processed, right? So since it is stored in the body, sometimes you don't have to be like going through why it is that I feel all these things and I need to uh, heal myself. We can actually go to the body and let the body do its job, just releasing.
Yeah. Which goes back to that yelling and that feeling of big rage. It is, it's cathartic. And
Why are you yelling? Because it feels good.
yes. Yeah, I mean, maybe I would have more releases if I were a sports fan. You know, when you watch people who are watching sports games, they go all in on yelling. I mean,
Yep.
it's one of the few socially accepted places to just scream your head off.
That and a rock concert.
Yes, yes. And like to work those emotions out. So that's interesting. And I again, like as I'm doing my fists of anger and as I'm doing my addiction meditation in the morning, I'm monologuing to myself and I'm like talking myself through why we do this. And just these insights are coming through. And as you were saying, like anger has so much energy in it. And so I was thinking about fists of anger, you know, that movement and that O breath and the really kind of intense feeling for me anyway. It's like it takes a lot of stamina to be moving my arms and breathing in that way. But it feels like I had all of this energy, like all this capital that was invested in anger, and now it's locked in there. It's like a low return CD. You know, it's like having money that you can't get to, but it's not really giving you anything in return. And then I was like, oh, when I'm doing fists of anger, I'm liquidating it and I'm receiving that energy back. And all you just think about like how cool anger is evolutionarily and how like that's amazing. It can give me a burst of energy when I need it, right? And then hopefully I use that energy to do something like, you know, instead of being afraid, like the tiger's coming after me and I was like, hell no, I'm, you know, you can't get my family. I'm angry. I'm gonna fight back. But if I if I'm not regularly like releasing that energy from anger, basically I'm storing a lot of my own vital energy in a way I can't use it.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Yeah.
like this idea of liquidating it.
I love the what you mentioned about using it uh to like fight or whatever it is, because also when we talk about the frequencies of emotions, anger is right there in the change between the more dense, darker, negative ones and the positive ones. It's the switch, right? So you can definitely use anger. And we talked about how you often, when you get angry, you create the most amazing things, like your book, for example, and other
Oh.
things that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's I mean, it's a beautiful way to think about anger. And then like to this question that we're engaged with today, right? Why we have triggers. Um, like the energy of anger there is an invitation into what's been unaddressed, right?
Yeah.
So what if I'm getting that surge of anger because it's like, oh man, it's gonna take some stalwartness, some inner strength to really look eye to eye, face to face at this thing in myself. I don't want to acknowledge that's making me angry at somebody else. So what if the anger is like a boost of energy I need? We talked about like this image that Gabor Mate uses that I really like. He says if you're being triggered, it means there's gunpowder inside of you, right? The only kind of things that can get triggered and go off are things that are explosive for some reason, right? There's an
Mm.
underlying trauma or unresolved something. And I was seeing too, like when I'm triggered, it's like somebody's finger is in me. It means I'm hooked to them somehow, or I'm hooked to the thing somehow. So what would it look like to use that surge of anger not to attack the thing, but to like go, what is this thing that I am not addressing?
Yeah. Uh, uh, so I love that you brought that with Gabor Mate says as well. I was even thinking about that. Is because sometimes I feel like when I'm analyzing why am I triggered about by this, why am I angry about this, uh, it often comes to the fact that I'm giving my power away to someone else, and it often is that I'm giving too much importance to something that either I want them to do or how I want them to be or uh, what I want to be doing in the time that I was giving to them in
Um,
something like this. Especially when things don't go the way you expect. Like you have a high expectation of something and then it doesn't go the way you plan. Then you think, ah, I should be doing something else. And it is all about what when we give our power away. Like if we focus on and I'm not saying that the anger is wrong in any way. Sometimes it's just that we need to use them and like move or shake whatever it is.
yeah.
But for it to not even happen is like the more we can be present and knowing that things are perfect the way they are, instead of thinking like, I have a clear expectation of this, and if it isn't this way, then there's something wrong. Then we don't have to be angry.
Yeah. It's more like I'm coming more and more to the idea that um anger is just not effective when it's being used all the time. And I have this image of this very sharp like katana swords like a samurai would have, right? And it's this specialized tool and it is amazing when you need something really sharp. And but if I'm using it like every day to cut vegetables and to kind of, move things around on my desk and point to people, it's very dangerous and it's like dulling it as the weapon to be the sharp slicer when I need it. So less having a judgment around anger and it being wrong and more just like, oh, if this is my everyday go-to tool,
Mm,
it's not very effective. And again, I really can feel it's tying up so and like making unavailable so much of my life force energy. So
yeah.
I want to have anger as a sharp sword in a moment to make a decisive action,
Yeah.
not as the thing I'm trying to use as my everyday tool all the time.
You don't have to use anger to get out of bed, right? Most times.
Yes. And I have used anger that way.
Yeah.
I used to when I would find myself getting tired, I have a complex relationship with relaxing, and it's felt very threatening for me to relax in the past. It's taken practice and conscious attention for me to sit and do nothing.
Mm,
And so I used to get this anxiety around relaxing and feeling that it wasn't okay and it wasn't safe. And so when I would start getting tired, instead of embracing it and enjoying and resting, I would pick a fight. I would find something to get angry about and
mm,
use that to wake me up. Really, it was a self-medicating. I'm going to give my brain adrenaline right now so that I don't feel sleepy because feeling sleepy didn't feel okay. So I've been there
yeah.
using
Yeah.
anger.
Especially because when we are in a more relaxed state, it's often when our body starts like, okay, now we can unpack all these things that you haven't addressed before.
Oh,
Uh,
good point. Yeah, that's when the
so,
feeling starts happening. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, so you
I
brought up.
have used,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I have used anger to suppress sadness. Like, quite a few times, and I still catch my.
That makes total sense. Yeah. Like asking what's the grief underneath this? And that what a powerful question around feeling triggered and this idea that's resonating. When you were talking about that, Lise, when you were saying when we're triggered and when we're angry, we're giving our power away to something else, my whole body was having truth chills. Just like that release and relax of, yep, that's true.
Yeah.
And so that question of how am I giving my power away is really vulnerable. And no wonder it feels so much better to go into anger. Like, it's just you idiot with your bumper sticker. Like,
Mm.
instead of, oh, how am I feeding something that isn't serving me, or where am I like not being responsible for myself?
Yeah. Can I tell a little story that Andrew from our band, who made a intro for the podcast, by the way, told me?
Oh, I love it.
So it is just that like may I think it's a made up story. It might be that it happened with someone one day, but I find it very interesting because that speaks to the anger. It was about uh, a farmer who needed to cut a tree and he didn't have like a chainsaw, but his neighbor had, and he knew his neighbor had a chainsaw, and he was thinking, ah, if only he would lend me his chainsaw, I could cut this tree. And he keeps on thinking like, but he's not gonna lend me the chainsaw, and like I don't want to ask. And but if I had a chainsaw, and it goes and goes, everything is his mind until he gets to the point of like, I don't even want that chainsaw, that neighbor is terrible, and so on. And then one day he gets to the door of his neighbor and just knocks at the door to say like, I didn't even want your chainsaw, I and just like jumps with all the anger without never even having asked for the chainsaw.
It is a true story. I'm the person. No, I'm. Oh, but I relate to that so much.
But how many people, how, and even like ourselves, how many times we create these assumptions and start getting angry at someone without even knowing the truth in the story?
Yeah. You've just reminded me of a really powerful tool that I have at my disposal that I haven't been using regularly, and it's the Work by Rinkady, and that series of questions. Have you read any of her books?
No, I'm curious.
So I've just read one, but this is how she describes the work is like you go into this process of asking, is it true? So
Mm,
like that neighbor's a, because he's not gonna lend me his chainsaw. So it's like, is it true?
mm,
Can I 100% know it's true? Right? Because sometimes the is it true? And you're like, yes, it's true. He's a jerk. He won't let me use chainsaw. Can you 100% know it's true? Okay, no, I'm doing some mind reading. I'm assuming how somebody else. It's like an opportunity to recognize I'm in assumption. Is it, can
yeah.
you 100% know it's true? And then you continue and it's like, um, how how am I acting if I think it's true? How would I act if I thought it wasn't true? And then you play with language. You do what she calls the turnaround, where you go, okay, so if my statement is my neighbor's a jerk because he won't lend me his chainsaw, then you just try switching things around. I'm a jerk because I wouldn't lend him my chainsaw if I had one. I'm a jerk because I won't ask for his chainsaw. Um, he's a nice person because he won't lend me his chainsaw. You just try like switching the positive to negative, the order of the sentence, like converse, inverse, and play with it until you come upon a sentence where you get that bodily yes of, oh, that's the truth of it. And oftentimes it will be something that's like, I'm the jerk, right? Like, I'm the jerk because I wouldn't want to lend him my chainsaw because I would be afraid he
Mm.
wouldn't return it, maybe is at the root of that. Um, but it's damn, it's good. And for some reason, it's really easy to, um, like when I just follow those steps, even if I start in real contrariness, it's very easy to transform it rapidly
Mm.
into a something that feels a lot more true.
Yeah. Mm. I need to check that book. Well, let's put in the description.
Yeah, let's see. She's got several books. The one I read was called "I Need Your Love. Is That True?" And it's
Mm.
specifically about relationships and what we demand from other people or think we need from other people, and then using the work, the "Is it true?" um, on those assumptions we're making. But like it's a really great tool for noticing when we're in assumption mode.
There's even the one of the songs you made, and I helped with the Geometry of Trust, where you talked about how a reality is a set of assumptions,
Yeah.
and yeah, getting in. I feel like this is part of what we're doing with this podcast is getting in the habit of questioning those assumptions.
Yeah, and the first part of that is recognizing what is an assumption. And again, thinking about that spectrum, if I'm always talking to people who agree with me, how easy is it to forget that those are assumptions, right? We start just taking them as axiomatic truths about the universe.
Let me use your genius in wording things in here. How would you uh, define an assumption, Megan?
Hmm. I think I'm going to lean into help from geometry, right? Because that's geometry is a logic system, and it's this. Okay, so geometry or any kind of math or logic system is saying, um, given that these things are true, here's what can be logically arrived at and concluded, right? So you start with like, you know, the, a point is like this, a line is like this, a plane is like this, and from that you can do all these proofs about triangles and intersecting lines and things like that. So how would I define an assumption? Um, it's like a posit of a trait about whatever context we're looking at. So in geometry, it's like a posit about figures, lines and points and planes. Um, but in the larger world, it's a posit about, like, I guess, the nature of reality. I don't know. It's hard for me to define an assumption because I don't want to define it negatively
Yeah.
because I think that's how I would normally use it, right? Like, oh, you're making assumptions about me. It's this negative thing, and so the egoic part of my brain has this definition of assumptions when other people make them, not when I make them. That's something like untrue biases and prejudices that people are having, right? That would be one way of talking about assumptions. But really, it's just like an assumption is a tool we need to be able to communicate. So, how about this? It's a shared premise.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I love the fact that it is a shared. You said shared premise because it goes back to what we were talking about, like other people, like needing other people to make sense of our reality and like beliefs. It's like, oh, if you believe this and this other person believes this and this other then must be true.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so they like assumptions help us navigate the world, because probably we would have a hard time getting a lot done um, if constantly everything were new.
It makes us feel safer as well, knowing that, oh, this is reality.
Yeah. I think that's a human need that our culture doesn't acknowledge, right? It's a human need to have our reality shared by other people, or maybe just by other sentient beings. I mean, how do you remember the movie Castaway? And Tom Hanks is all alone and he
Yeah.
creates another sentient being. You know, he draws a face on a volleyball and is like interacting with and relating to somebody else. And, you know, but even if you were near an animal, right? If you could have some other sentient life form and go like, okay, we're sharing this reality, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's a basic human need, um, illustration of which people who are put into solitary confinement are driven out of their minds. You know, it has a lasting, horrific impact on your mental health and capacity.
Yeah.
Um, so we need other people who share our assumptions. We need these shared premises in order to operate. And then when we're not aware that they're assumptions, or we're not aware, yeah, we're not aware, well, this is an assumption. I just found this fascinating. For people who grew up with textbooks where, or you know, just any drawings where three-dimensional figures are represented as two-dimensional figures. Like for us, if we look at a drawing of a cube, it's flat on the page, but we like, oh, that's a cube, that's three-dimensional, right? And if you take drawings like that to a culture where that's not a thing, people look at you like you're goofballs, right? They're like, no, that's not a cube. It's, you know, like two squares stacked on top of each other with some extra lines drawn in, right? But like my eye will automatically see, like I'm acculturated to see the three-dimensional shape.
Yeah.
And so like that's a very clear, and I think like a great example, because it doesn't come with judgment. You know, it's not a moral thing. It's just like, is this two-dimensional or three-dimensional? It's just geometry. But we need shared premises with people, but we forget that there are different premises we could assume. And then we get really locked into this set is the only right way, or maybe the only possible way. And so you were bringing up the song Geometry of Trust, and that blew my mind when I was in college and learning non-Euclidean geometry. And the whole premise of non-Euclidean geometry is if you just take one of the things that Euclid posits, which is that the definition of straight lines, like, is that they never meet. Or sorry, the definition of parallel lines is they never meet. And people were like, if you just don't posit that, take that one assumption out, you get a completely different geometry. And it still has its own logic and things work and you could do proofs. Um, but it looks very different.
Yeah. Because they, what was the thing they meet in the
They meet at infinity.
infinity? Yeah.
Yeah. Which becomes like really handy, because then you can do all these proofs where you're like, okay, I'm drawing a circle to represent infinity. That's where the parallel lines meet. And then all this stuff happens as a result of that. Like, so you can use what you know about circles and lines cutting through circles to prove all kinds of stuff.
It's pretty crazy.
and
Yeah.
and and there's no, like, there shouldn't be, I think, like, maybe we do have this innate sense of something unfamiliar is wrong, but there's no morality to like the lines meet or they don't meet. But we can notice how locked in we are to our assumptions. If somebody tells you no parallel lines meet at infinity, like, does that stir up anger in you? That's wrong. That's not the kind of world we live in.
Yeah, probably to some scientist at the time or mathematician at the time, it draws some anger. Yeah. And still, it is like choosing one assumption or the other. right? Because I think we even talked in one of these podcasts about the Schrodinger's cat, haven't it? We
But we're talking about it now. Let's bring it all in. I love
uh,
it. This is the this is the math
yeah,
and physics episode.
yeah. Because when you think of like the Euclidean geometry or non-Euclidean geometry, you're still like, okay, now we're using this set of assumptions, and this will work because it's within this set. Or I'm going to use this other set. It's either or, right?
Yeah.
When we think of that, think of Schrodinger's cat, where while you don't lift the lid, the cat can be dead or alive at the same time. Are you still there? You're still there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's both at the same time
Yeah.
until you.
And how uncomfortable that kind of thinking tends to be for us. Um that but also it points out the only thing making something true or not true really is the observer.
Yeah, at least in material world, because if we stay only in energy, then is the observer even real?
Can you say more about that if we stay only in energy?
Yeah, because if we're thinking of matter,
Yeah.
uh, then the observer matters. If we're thinking of only energy, and energy exists independently of us being here or not.
Mm. So maybe a helpful question to ask is like, how much solidification helps and how much solidification hinders, right? Because if I'm thinking about like energy resolving into matter, right? And uh like Heisenberg, another quantum physicist, is like he came up with this equation that really says we can either know the charge of the electron or we can know its location, but we can't know both, right? So it's like it's only once it's resolved into like observed matter that it is pin downable.
And
Um,
that's because the electron, for what I heard the last few years, last few months at least, uh, it's actually not a matter thing. It's more energy than physical.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you can't calculate. You can't assume have the assumption that that's a physical thing. If you assume, that goes back to the assumptions. If you assume an electron is a physical thing, then we're going to try to observe it as if it was a physical thing, but it's not physical. So the same set of rules don't apply. So
right.
of
And
course
it
it's going to be looking all weird.
yes, yes, it feels like it's behaving wrong because we're attaching our assumption to it. And like we have all these experiences of matter, like energy resolved into matter, and it feels very solid. And that is, like literally crazy making, in physics when you look at like how energy behaves, and if we go like, no, it's matter, it should do this, and it seems to be um cuckoo. But it's also a really powerful metaphor, I think. Like this is what I was asking about, how much solidification, right? So I want to be able to operate in the world. I want to make assumptions about how other people are likely to respond if I do certain things. I want to be able to like kind of estimate what reactions I'm going to get. And if I get too solid, then I'm locked into those assumptions and I forget their assumptions. So I'm kind of like, what would be some assumptions I could acknowledge I'm making, but that it would be helpful to have about the world?
Mm. And how much we thinking of this, how much do we attach a reality to our what we can see and observe? and
Oh,
how helpful is it?
absolutely. All of it for me.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like going even back to the electron. Oh, if I can see and observe it, then it must be a physical thing. Well, tell this to people who can see the spirit of people who have passed already. Is their
Yeah,
bodies there because they can see it?
yeah,
Not really, but they can still see it, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I can see it, you can see it. Like, is it real only for me? Is it physical?
Yeah,
um,
and so many aspects of life have been pushed out of conversations in science because they say, oh, so for example, you know, uh, ESP or like remote viewing, these things don't exist because science can't replicate them in a lab. And the assumption being made and not addressed is that you're actually able to recreate the exact same situation in the lab because the people in the lab are going, we turned on the same number of lights, the room is the same temperature, that's it, the conditions are the same, right? And you're like, what about this whole level of conditions that you're not able to observe, right? Is that making sense?
yeah, because it's not in the same spectrum
Yeah.
that most people are able to access.
Yeah, including the intention of the people running the experiment. And if they're like filling the room with this is bull, you know, how does that impact somebody's ability to, you know, receive or transmit?
And how discounted it is the fact that we do perceive things in a range, right? Because it's not weird for anyone to say that, oh, someone who has some ear loss can have a loss of the ability to hear in a frequency. So, like, for example, some people
Right.
can hear the lower frequencies. Someone speaks very low, they can hear. But if someone speaks very high, they can hear anything because it's a frequency loss, right?
Yes. Oh, that's such a yes, a powerful thing to think about, a frequency loss.
It's the same thing with light. We perceive a frequency, but there are frequencies above and uh, below the frequencies that we can perceive that maybe some people can see.
Yeah, or like even using a black light, right?
Yeah,
And then you can see is it ultraviolet?
yeah.
Um, and it feels like this neat magic trick, but it's
Mhm.
a really important reminder. We assume so this is maybe like a kind of good head to bring things to. Um, we assume that what we perceive is the nature of the world. And that assumption, I think, is the number one that gets us into trouble, interpersonally as well as just in advancing what we know about the nature of the universe. Um, so let's have assumptions because we need them to, um, like, we need shared premises
Yeah.
with other people, but let's also call them assumptions and name them
Mm.
and practice saying, oh, this is an assumption I'm making. And then practice doing the work of when am I making assumptions that are not neutrally charged? When am I making assumptions that are charged with anger?
Yes. I love that you tied back to the anger in here. Can we not get angry at assumptions?
Yeah, or is that like I'm wondering if that could be an assignment, um, like when I'm getting angry. See, it's a challenge, right? Because when I'm angry, the anger for me is just like driving the bus. But I wonder if in combination with the homework from last week around looking for self-soothing and looking for some space I can create around the anger, can I then start asking what assumption is that anger driven by? Like the story of the neighbors with the chainsaw.
Mm. I'm just gonna try something here. I want to bring our insight for a second the screen just to because I think we can move into the insight now.
The first.
Just
Yeah.
to mark the insight. So we're going to talk about our insights, but I want to bring the homework first already before I forget.
Yeah.
I loved when you brought that question, like, is that true? Is it true? Maybe that's the question. Like, next time you feel angry during the next 2 weeks, ask both, is it true? And if it really is true, then you can ask, like we were saying, like, what's the charge where I'm giving my power away in this? Because it might be that it is not true and we're getting angry before, like we're talking about, uh at an assumption that we're making.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or it might be that there's a reason to be angry and we're giving our power away, and then we can bring that back.
Yeah. Oh, you've just helped me make the connection between Byron Katie's The Work and her questions and logical studies like in mathematics where we make assumptions. And it's that once I make an assumption, like making an assumption is for the purpose of running a thought experiment and seeing what conclusions come out of it. So like when you do the work and you ask, is it true? One of the questions is how how do I show up when I believe this is true? Right? Like, so it's not just I make an assumption and that's the end of it. I make an assumption and then I follow it logically to
Mm,
where it takes me. And in a mathematical system, you just make the assumptions at the beginning so that you can make sense. It's like you're creating a language. So it's the same as saying, let's assume the letter A says ah, and let's assume the letter B says B, right? Um, and then you can create a language on that. And you can't create a language unless you start with those definitions.
yeah.
But we work in the opposite way, where we're making assumptions to try to describe the world. So we always have the option of changing the initial assumption if when we do the math, the conclusion we get doesn't feel supportive or isn't something we want to give energy to.
Yeah. And even in language, there's moments where the sound of a letter is different than the usual.
And it's yeah, it's all descriptive, right? People didn't start by writing down alphabets and say like, I know these should be the sounds, right? It started with speech and then we captured it in in letters afterwards.
Maybe we can bring a little bit of that, like, there are exceptions to the rule. Can it be
Yeah,
okay with exceptions to the rule?
and complete rewriting of what we think the rules are, right? Because where are those rules? Only in our own minds most of the time.
Yeah.
So what's been your big insight from this conversation?
Mm, quite a lot. Uh, well, I already pointed the question that you brought, the is it true? Like, I'm gonna start doing that. Because I feel like even when we are getting more into anxiety, and I don't know if you ever had this, but I have anxiety sometimes, like feeling like when someone is on the road, for example, like, are they okay? It's gonna be fun. Like,
Yeah.
is it true that's, yeah, something could be, but is there anything that I can do about that right now? No. So can I
Yeah.
just let go?
Yeah. And is it also possible they're totally fine? Like,
Yeah.
is it equally possible they're totally fine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
Mm.
So that's a big one. I would definitely use that question. And also when we were talking about the uh, I totally blanked it. No, the nature of reality.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I don't have exactly words to explain, but there were a lot of uh light brainwaves connecting to
Mm.
me with that, because yeah, there is a lot of assumptions that we make, and yes, there is a lot of things that we need, like you're saying, to make sense of reality, and how, like, even when we were talking in the beginning, how we need that feedback, because if we're not getting the response we in 333 in here, we do get so I was coming to this conversation thinking of, oh yeah, we need to be able to be okay with breaking those assumptions, but maybe some assumptions are important, and maybe just need to be able to be open to shift them when it's needed, and it's not like just let's drop all the assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think being open to shift them is reliant upon recognizing they are assumptions. So creating a little bit of distance from what I think is true and what the absolute nature of reality is, or a lot of distance between those 2.
Yeah,
Um, like, okay, this is what seems to be true.
but
Yeah.
because we can have a disconnect to the point of assuming something that is it's not true, that actually, if we had the right assumption, could be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Um, like you're trying to fix something or get it to work and you're assuming it's because you have a software bug and it's because the thing is unplugged, right? Like it won't ever you won't ever be able to um, get it working right if you're not realizing it's got to be plugged in.
Yeah.
I think my biggest assumption from today is how vital it is for me to actually be able to see you or like see people when I'm interacting. Like the fact that the videos for me, like your video has been frozen this whole time. I'm so disoriented. I'm
Is it
so
still?
disoriented. It's still frozen, and I'm like,
That's
I don't.
quite
I
crazy.
can hear you, but maybe I'm in a different conversation, and it's like it
Yeah.
makes.
Oh, that's exactly what I was thinking about the nature of reality. How, because it was disorienting for me in the beginning when you were frozen all the time. For me, you're not right now.
So like it's a really beautiful reminder that I do need other people to reflect my reality back to me. And I think that can be such a gentle and self-compassionate thing to acknowledge that, I think we're given a lot of messaging around we should be independent and everybody's talking now about being sovereign. And okay, cool. Like I would love for everybody to be autonomous and in charge of their own happiness and freedom and what they get to eat and spend their time. And also we need one another. And I'm feeling that a lot right now.
Yes, we do. Ah, thank you for that reminder. I feel the same thing, and I feel that we need to, especially. I don't know if it is in US as well. Today is the Friends Day.
Oh, I don't know. I don't keep up on days and
Yeah,
things like that, but
I get messages from my friends, so like Happy Friends Day.
oh, that's beautiful.
It's a good reminder that yeah, we do need each other, and that's not like I should be more independent or I should get together. Like how beautiful it is that we live and that we create a reality where we get to be with each other and we get to support each other and have that feeling like, I don't have to hold all my shit together all the time. I actually can rely on others.
And also
And
I don't have to hold all of reality myself.
yeah, I, I can be reflected back things that open up my mind in so many different ways and like create all these multiple possibilities that maybe I wouldn't be able to see by myself. And how boring it would be if we're just like we're like I don't know, um humble, or like all those Sylvester Stallone movies where you're just fighting everything the whole time. And do we really want that, or do we want to have the joy of shared experience?
Hmm. True co-creation, right? We're creating ourselves with other people from their reflection, seeing different facets of the world.
Yeah.
I had this image this morning of I'm weaving my strand. And I had this thought. I was like, what if all of everything we're experiencing right now is in the micro moment right before the universe starts existing? I don't know where this thought came from. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so then, like, my job is to weave my strand of the
Mm.
universe, and whatever I create with my life, that's like my part, and everybody else is weaving their part, and with that we're making the
Oh,
universe. And maybe it makes sense more to think just time is not linear, right? So we're where we are, but we're also at the beginning of the universe, and we're also at the end. But I'm making we're making the plane as we're flying it. Like,
yeah.
we're making the container that we occupy, we're building it with these our individual strands that we're weaving. And that
Mm.
was a kind of comforting thought. Like, I'm here to weave my strand. I can only weave my strand. And I just want it to be something beautiful with everybody else's.
Yes. That's
So
a beautiful reflection to close, I guess. Yes.
oh,
We're waving together.
yes. We're weaving. Oh, you said weaving together. Oh, I was
Waving,
thinking
not
waving together.
waving.
All of the above. All of the
Well, we can be waving together as well.
above. Nice. Nice.
Assumptions.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Mm.
Mm. Can't wait to hear how the homework goes for everybody. I can't wait to see how it goes for me. How can I pause in anger and say, what assumptions am I making and how am I giving away my power?
Yes. Is this true? And if it's true, where am I giving away, and how am I giving away my power, and how can I bring it back? This is the homework, and I hope to remember for the next one. And I hope that we can have our guest on the
Yeah.
next episode as well, because we were bringing a very special guest today. We ended up going in a different direction, which is also great.
Mm.
And the other conversation can wait two
Yeah.
weeks.
Thank you.
Hmm, thank you. Gonna go out. See you in 2 weeks.